Well, hello, and thanks for joining us today. I'm Dr. Elliott Dennis, Assistant Professor of Livestock Marketing in the Department of Agricultural Economics at the University of Nebraska-Lincoln. Today is part of our weekly series of webinars produced by our Extension Farm Management team. To find a complete listing of the schedule and past recordings on our website, go to farm.unl.edu. We'd also like to highlight the Rural Response Hotline, which remains a great resource for ag professionals across the state. It provides mental health counseling, information regarding legal assistance, financial clinics, meditation, and much more. The hotline's toll-free number is 1-800-464-0258. Resources related to stress and wellness can also be found at ruralwellness.unl.edu. Today, the webinar focuses on the USDA National Agricultural Statistics Service and their production of the quarterly hog reports that detail the inventory of breeding, marketing hogs, and the future supply of marketing hogs. Today, we'll be looking at what exactly are in these reports, how they can be useful to producers in setting production and marketing strategies. Today, joining me to present this is Nick Streff, Director of USDA NASS Northern Plains Regional Field Office in Lincoln. He oversees the data collection, the analysis, and the publication of NASS estimates for North Dakota, South Dakota, Nebraska, and Kansas, and he'll be presenting our webinar. Nick, thanks for joining us.
All right, thanks for having me.
And now we'll just turn it over to you, Nick, for if you want to go ahead and present on basically the quarterly hog reports, and then I'll follow Nick and show how some of the apps and tools that we're developing here at UNL to help visualize a lot of this information.
Okay, well, let's get started then. So thanks for having me on today. I appreciate it. As Dr. Dennis noted, Nick Streff, Director of the Northern Plains. And also one thing to note with that, I also was the NASS Hogs and Pig statistician for 3 years before I moved to Nebraska and assumed this position. So I'm quite familiar with the inner workings of the program, kind of the steps they follow, some of the administrative data they look at, and kind of the mechanics of the program. However, I'm not exactly fully in tune with some of the most recent revisions or changes they had, but I can speak to, how the program works. So with that, we'll kind of just keep moving here. So today, before I jump into the Hogs and Pigs program, I'm just going to do a slight detour. I just want to give you a brief history of NASS, some of the things we do and don't do to kind of bring everybody up to the same playing field. And then we will dive into that Hogs and Pigs program and talk in hopefully some pretty good detail for you. So as we look at this, who is NASS? We are the National Agricultural Statistics Service. We are one of the statistical agencies for the USDA. There are several statistical agencies for the USDA. However, we are the main one that talk exclusively to farmers and ranchers and also ag businesses when we develop our data. When you look back at our history, we like to claim George Washington as our first statistician. In 1791, he completed a survey that had 8 questions and went out to 5 states. And basically the goal of that survey was, would there be enough food to get through the winter? That was kind of one of the question's goals. Then you jump ahead to President Lincoln in 1862. And from there, that's when President Lincoln established the USDA in 1862. And from the very beginning, NASS was part of that. We had a different name back then. Our name back then was called the Division of Statistics. And the first report was put out in 1863. So while we have had a few different names over the years, the importance of collecting data and publishing it has been at the forefront in the beginning of USDA. So who is NASS today? We're roughly 800 personnel. We have 12 regional offices, as you can see on the screen. The Northern Plains is that middle section there, is which I'm in charge of. Our office is in Lincoln, but we do have people throughout in each state. In each state, we have someone responsible for public outreach, and we also have someone in each state that's responsible for training our personal interviewers who actually travel out to personally interview farmers or make phone calls over the phone. So we still do maintain a presence there. And as Dr. Elliott already noted, We do, you know, a lot of the beginning analysis, the data collection, planning, all those phases begin, you know, locally in our offices. So we cover it all for those 4 states, and all the other 11 regions in NASS do the same thing. So the numbers, when they first come out or when they're first looked at, they're looked at by a local group of statisticians or analysts before they're sent into our headquarters office for a second level review. Something to also note, we do have phone centers in Montana, Wyoming, Oklahoma, Missouri, and Arkansas, because we collect most of our data via the phone. So for the Northern Plains, the Montana, Wyoming data center do the majority of our calling. So if you happen to, if there's any producers on the webinar today, if you happen to get a phone call from a Wyoming area code or Montana, there's a good chance it's a NASS representative calling to talk to you about some data. And of course, we have our headquarters unit in Washington, D.C., and a secondary set of divisions in St. Louis, Missouri. So when you look at NASS, our goal is to provide timely, accurate, and useful statistics and service to U.S. agriculture. We cover 120 crop commodities, roughly 40 livestock commodities. We put out over 400 reports nationally every year. And when you break that down, that's over 9,000 state reports as the states break down each publication. And the graphic to the left there notes our Egg Statistics Board calendar. We publish this about every November, early December for the following year. So all these reports are scheduled in advance. You know the time, you know the date they're coming out, so people can look for them and know when the data is going to be available. And the majority of these 400 reports are voluntary. We voluntarily ask producers to, you know, stop what they're doing, give us their time, and share their information so we can publish it at the county or state level. One of our only programs that is mandatory would be our Census of Agriculture that we conduct every 5 years, and a few of the census follow-on surveys. So other than the census programs, all NASS, the majority of NASS programs are voluntary. So why would the USDA, you know, publish this data? Why is it important? Well, first, it's used by farmers, it's used by policymakers, agribusinesses, and it's used for marketing decisions. It's used to develop farm programs. So while a producer may not always see the direct impact to them, we can share that, you know, extension economists are using it in their presentations when they're presenting to producers. Your local co-op is using NASS data as they're determining their marketing decisions. So it is used all around the agriculture industry, and there is a need for the data. Another important part about NASS data is the fact that it's equal access to all and it's unbiased. So as the slide before noted, you know, there's a calendar of when the report's going to be published. Everybody is able to get the information at the same time, the same date, so that they can use it for their decision-making process. There is no such thing as advanced knowledge or an advance on this data. It's released at the same time to all. And as I mentioned, who uses this report? You know, marketing service, economist. It's used by other USDA programs. You know, when you form a farm bill or when you're executing any farm bill programs, oftentimes it's NASS data that's used in the calculations to either administer that program or to develop that program. So NASS data is used in a lot of different places. But one thing I want to know what we do not do. NASS does not set policy. We do not regulate anything. We do not have any auditors. We do not permit influence. We don't have any political appointees. Some USDA agencies do, not all of them, but some do. NASS, from our administrator all the way down to the newest person hired, we have no political appointees. Another thing to note is NASS does not disclose individual reports. Our goal is to collect the data and summarize it and either publish it at the county or the state level. So we really work hard to make sure that we're not sharing any individual information when we publish that report. So sometimes we have to hide a state or hide a county if we didn't get enough reports, or if there's a farmer or rancher in that county that holds too large of a percentage of a commodity. We'll also disclose that as well, to hide that as well, to make sure we're not sharing any individual information. Also, another thing to note is confidentiality is a big thing for NASS. So we don't share any reports that come to us with any other federal agencies, any other USDA agencies. And we're also free from the Freedom of Information Act request. We do not have to comply with those. Nobody can send in a FOIA request to get your data. NASS, as a statistical agency, is protected by laws that we cannot share your data, and we don't have to because of those laws. So now that I've kind of brought everybody up to speed here, let's talk a little bit about the quarterly Hogs and Pigs report. So now that we're jumping into this, we do it in the quarters of December, March, June, and September. The reason I start with December there is the fact that's our base survey period. So every December, we draw a new sample of producers that we're going to contact. And then we continue to contact those same producers March, June, and September. And then we draw a new sample again for December. So that's why it always starts in December. It's our base period. So we just completed the December report, a few months ago. That would have been the first time that new group would have been contacted. And we collect data from all hog and pig U.S. producers. Well, actually, a sample of them is who we look at. It's not a census; it is a sample, and I'll get into that here in a few more slides. Another thing, just to note, the information we do collect, it's inventory, breeding herd, market inventory, weight group, farrowings, pig crop, and litter rate. We also collect death loss. And then in December, we do collect a little bit of additional information such as on-farm slaughter, and we also collect hogs raised under contract and inventory values. So something to note, December, since it's our base period, that's the only time we publish all 50 states. And then in the follow-on quarters, we actually only publish the 16 largest states. So once again, December, we survey all the states, publish all the states, but in the follow-on quarters, we survey a smaller amount of states and even publish an even smaller amount. And I have a graphic coming up here to kind of show this to you. So these are the quarterly published states that you're going to find in the publication in March, June, and September. There are, I think, 16 states here, and this covers 96% of the hog inventory. So we're only publishing this amount of the inventory, and these are the states that are part of it. However, in those other quarters, March, June, and September, we also survey these additional unpublished states, these 12. So this makes up 28 states that we survey in March, June, and September. And this covers 99% of the hog inventory. So we don't have to really survey those other 22 states because we're covering the majority of the hog inventory in our normal quarterly program. And every 5 years, we review the states that are in either an annual state status, an unpublished state status, or a published state status. We go through that with our census of inventory review to see if we need to move states back and forth to make sure we have the right mix of states to kind of hit our targets there of covering the majority of the hog inventory. So now it gets to, these are the states that are in the program. How do we determine who we're going to talk to? That's often a big question I get. Well, first, to get into some really good detail here, we kind of have two different places we look. We have what we call as our list frame. That's kind of our internal lingo for it. But think of a list of all the names of farmers and ranchers in the U.S. And along with that list, think of, it's noted, do they have storage capacity? Do they have crop acreage? Do they have cattle? Do they have hogs? So we have this list that we're constantly updating. Who's a partnership? Who's a partner? Who's gone in business? Who's gone out of business? We have this list frame. And because it's a list, it's never complete. There are always people coming into business, going out of business, redoing something. So that's our list frame. And that's the main place we draw names from when we're sampling for our hogs and pigs program. But we also have a thing is what we call our area frame, and that's based on a piece of land. So every year in June, we go out to a specific plot of land, think of it as like basically 1 square mile, and we determine who is, we ask, talk to the producers around there, who operates inside that square mile area, that segment. And then from there, whatever names we find operating in there, we compare those names to our list frame to, do we have them on our list? And this helps us measure our list incompleteness. So with that, we get two different indications when we're doing our hog survey to make sure we're accounting for everything. We just don't have a list side indication. We have this area frame component, so we get multiple indications going forward. So with that, now we get to talk about, well, who sampled? I kind of covered this a little bit already. The sample is drawn from all known U.S. hog producers. So do they have positive inventory data? Then they have a chance to be sampled. However, the larger operators are sampled more heavily than a smaller operator would be, because our goal is to cover the percentage of inventory. And something to also know, once you get so large in a certain state, and each state's a little bit different, we call those our extreme operators. Those are sampled 1-to-1 every quarter. If you are one of those larger farms, you're going to be in the survey every single quarter because you're large enough that your report matters, that we need to account for it. In December, our sample size was roughly around 6,500, a little bit less. And the follow-on quarters, that March, June, and September, it's normally about 5,500 in our sample. But there's more to the sampling than that. We have what we call, it's called stratified random sampling. And here's an example of some of the strata we have. And each state is different. These are just 2 examples. And you can kind of notice here, strata 80 in both tables, it's the same. It's 1 to 99 hogs for both of them. However, when you already jump down to strata 82, you can see on one side, it's 1 to almost 1,000. And then on the smaller table side, it's 1 to 500. And once again, each state's a little bit different because they have different size operations. They have a different population we draw from. So we have to have different strata tables to make sure we're doing our best to come up with a complete number for each state. So, and as you go down through these, they're sampled at different rates. That strata 80 might be sampled 1 out of 10, 1 out of 20. So think every 10th person is going to be in the survey, or every 20th person. But as you work your way down, strata 90 might be sampled 1 out of 3, 1 out of 4. And then when you get all the way down to that strata 98, which would be our extreme operators, the really big operators in that state, they're going to be sampled 1 to 1. Because once again, our goal is to cover the inventory. We need to cover it. And with hogs, there's some large producers in a few areas that we need to make sure we work with them to get their report. I'm also going to note here in the one table, it's got a strata 97, which is a sow strata. Every year we can adjust these strata in their definitions. They come up for review so we can make little tweaks if they didn't perform the way we wanted them to, or if our some of our CVs are kind of getting larger than we'd want them to be, or if we want to sample more or less of them. And recently we've started to add kind of some a sow strata. So that's what this strata 97 is here. As you know, hogs have moved, there are more operations that are farrow to wean. We need to make sure we're picking up those farrowing. So in a few states, we've started to identify a sow-only strata to make sure we're finding those farrowing operations so we can get the correct number of farrowings and pig crop for our national level report. So once we've done all that work, this is what the result is. This is the number of samples table from our hog survey back in December. It's number of samples for all the states. And you can kind of see here, there's a wide variation of number of samples, even based on published states. You have Texas down here, that's a published state, or even Oklahoma, only 65 in their total hog sample, versus Iowa, the largest hog state, at almost 1,000. So there are some differences there, but this is how the sampling plays out in those states. And just to note here, on the December survey, I believe NASS got just over a 70% response rate in the December hog survey. So fairly good cooperation from the producers when we're working through our hog surveys. Yeah, just over 70%. So now let's talk about how we collect the data. Our primary data collection, we have face-to-face interviews. We're not doing those right now, but that is a component that we will have and hope to bring back in the near future. We also do, we mail out the surveys, we do a phone follow-up, and we also have what we call as electronic data collection, where basically the producer can do it online. So normally the flow of information is we mail a survey out, they can do it online, and if they haven't responded after a week or so, we do a phone follow-up to get that data. The majority of our data is collected by phone. A lot of it's collected from those data collection centers. However, for some of our larger producers, we do set up reporting arrangements where they talk to the same interviewer every quarter or the same person, because we're really trying to develop that relationship. Because as I mentioned, all this data is collected voluntarily. So we're doing everything we can to make sure we can get reports from producers every quarter. When they're doing the interview over the phone, when we're doing a phone follow-up interview, we do have a computer program that leads the interviewer through the questions. And that program has some history built into it. So if the reporter gives us a higher or lower inventory than what they've had in the past by a significant amount, it will prompt that interviewer to ask a few more questions so we can get some, kind of some comments to go along with that number. Or let's say their litter rate's really low, it will prompt us to ask an additional question, kind of why. And that's where we can get those comments from producers to say, well, yeah, my litter rate was lower, I had an outbreak of PRRS. Or yeah, I didn't farrow last month, I'm doing a depop repop, so I'm bringing in some new gilts, so I'm gonna be down on farrowings for a while. So those comments can be really helpful as we go to the analysis phase of our data collection. So now moving on. So here's a quick picture of what the mailed report looks like. All the questions are the same, whether you're doing it online, over the phone, or through the mail. It's all the same layout, it's the same function, and the same wording. So once we get the data collected, once we've made those phone calls, or got those mail reports and done our follow-up, it comes into our office in Lincoln if we're breaking it down to just the Northern Plains. And we have a team of people that look through this data. They're looking through it for consistency. They're looking through it for reasonableness, where there are large changes from quarter to quarter. Because remember, we contact the same people every quarter for a year, and then we switch out that sample. So we have some good history to know, well, they're normally about 10,000 in inventory. Now they're 15. Do we need to call them back? Is there a comment to explain this increase? Or their farrowings are lower? Is there something that explains this? So this team goes through this every quarter and looks for reasonableness and consistency in the data, and also looks at it by size group as well, to make sure are all the operations generally moving in a similar direction? Are there any outliers? So once this team has gone through this data set and looked at those outliers, we summarize it. We summarize the data, kind of add it all up, put in a non-response adjustment, because this is weighted information. Something I forgot to mention back on that stratified table had all those different strata in there. Oftentimes when we call a producer, they can say, well, can't you talk to somebody else? And we have to say, no, you were the one selected to speak for 9 other people just like you, or speak for 5 other people just like you. So when we don't get responses from everyone, we do have to reweight the data to account for those non-response. So once we reweight the data, we can summarize it to a state level number for Nebraska or Kansas or whatever state we're working on. And once we get that summarized and we think the data is clean, we prepare an estimate and we send it to our headquarters unit in Washington, D.C., and they look at it again. We have our livestock branch out there, and it goes through another round of review to make sure we didn't miss anything at the local level. They'll look at it from a national perspective. And the interesting part about the national perspective is they can do a true balance sheet. It's hard for us to do that at the state level, but at the US level, the hog team in there in that livestock branch can look through a balance sheet approach to set the national and state level targets. So they can look at the previous inventory, they can look at any imports that have come in, especially the ones from Canada, they can look at any exports, they can look at the deaths, they can look at the commercial slaughter data, how many pigs were slaughtered, and then they can also take the current survey indications that we worked on in the local states and sent to them, and then they can look at that to develop that national target. And at the national level is where the numbers on the best. So they may see things a little bit differently, and then they may need to call us back in the future to adjust our state level numbers to make sure we can meet that national target. Because once again, they have that balance sheet that they can look at to make sure everything's falling in line with the survey indications plus with the slaughter data that's provided. So, and once we go through all this process, the data is released. So I believe today is the March hog report is coming out today, later this afternoon. So, they've worked through all this process, and now it's going to be released later today. So another thing I want to note is how good are the USDA NASS numbers when it comes to hogs? Well, let me show you. Here's the Hogs Reliability table. It's one of the last pages in every USDA NASS report. We have these same types of table for cattle and corn and a lot of the crops. And in this reliability table, if I can draw your attention first to kind of these middle columns here, this is saying that over the last 20 quarters, so over the last 5 years, on average, NASS has revised the first inventory estimate on average 700,000. So 700,000 out of 78 million has been our average revision. Our smallest revision was 60,000, and our largest revision, I didn't look up the quarter of this, but our largest revision was 2.2 million. So even that largest revision is roughly a 3% correction in the number of hogs, or you can kind of like that 2.2 million, that's basically a week of slaughter, was that revision in there. So while we always want to do our best and have the smallest revisions possible, even our largest revision was, around 3% or less. Another thing to kind of point out here is, are NASS numbers normally conservative and too low? Are they maybe normally too high? Well, you just move over to the next column in the table and you can see over the past 5 years, 9 times NASS has been low, 11 times NASS has been too high. So really kind of a good mix of numbers here, because it gets back to our goal is just to publish the best data that's out there. We're not trying to publish a high number or a low number. Our goal is to publish the best number. And this is kind of what this table shows. Now you can get down here and look at expected farrowings. I'm not going to shy away from this. It looks like we're normally a little low when it comes to expected farrowings, but in total on pig crop, sorry, on inventory and even on pig crop, you can see we're about 50-50 too high or too low. And we also note, for those of you who really want to get into the statistics of it all, we have a 90% confidence interval that our December number is going to be plus or minus 2% from that 78 million that we roughly published. So the folks who really want to kind of dig into that. One more thing, a few more things I'd like to point out is in our secretary's briefing. So today they're going to do a secretary's briefing where they brief either the Secretary of Agriculture or a representative of the Secretary of Agriculture. And this is a slide that is often in that, that briefing. And this just notes NASS, we normally look at these numbers after we've set all our numbers because you know, we don't want to be influenced by anything, but we do look at them after the fact. And you can see this is for December, that in December, the trade range was from either 97% all the way up to 100, 102%, almost 103. The trade guess was 99% and NASS came in at 91% of previous year. And you can kind of see, you know, NASS was right on when it came to what trade was expected. So the trade group, I don't know all their names, but you know, it's kind of the professionals who are watching the markets, professional analysts, they provide their guesses anonymously to NASS, and then we're able to kind of put them in this format. You can see NASS was NASS was lower on breeding herd than trade expected, and kind of so on and so forth. So this is something that is in every secretary's briefing, and all of these briefings are available on the NASS website. They're posted shortly after the report is released. So people can go out and see, well, what did trade expect compared to where NASS was at, if they didn't already find it in an ag media story somewhere. So now let's talk just a little bit about revisions. I noted we have revisions in a previous slide. Revisions are something that, especially in the hog program, that we have every quarter, sometimes bigger or smaller, but we do have them every quarter. So NASS does have some rules in place on when and how we can do revisions. So basically, just to talk mainly about the quarterly inventory part, in December, we can revise back up to 7 quarters, so 2 years. In our December, that base survey, we can go back that far. However, in our March, June, and September surveys, we can only go back a year. So we just have these rules in place to make sure we just don't go back and randomly revise another quarter. These are the quarters that are open for revision. We can't go back 3 years. We can't go back 4 years whenever we feel like it. We have guidelines in place that tell us when we can do our revisions. However, for the Census of Agriculture, once we complete that, we do complete a 5-year review. So we look at all 20 quarters for a 5-year period. And then once we complete the census review, those quarters are locked and can never be revised again. So that's kind of the framework we look at when we're doing our revisions. However, when do we actually do them? And to talk about that, we really only do revisions if we have updated or new or revised data from operations. So if we got an incorrect report from a large operator or maybe from several large operators, that could prompt us to do a revision. If we looked at the numbers and found, oh, this report was given to us in error accidentally or whatever it might be. However, the majority of our revisions are based on administrative data, and the biggest source of our administrative data is slaughter. If you think about the US slaughter metrics and what we have, you know, 95% of the hog slaughter is federally inspected. So we have very good, accurate numbers to look at when it comes to hog slaughter. And that other 5% is covered. NASS does a monthly slaughter report for the non-federally inspected slaughter. So we have a very good numbers in terms of what's come through the slaughter plants. So if we're looking at slaughter and we see slaughter is up 5%, but our inventory was only up, you know, 1% or even down. Well, if those hogs made it through the slaughtering floor, that means they had to be in the inventory. And that's what prompts us to go back and do those revisions. So if slaughter is higher or lower than a NASS report says it should be, that's going to kick off the revisions process. And we also, so we can normally have to go back 2 quarters to make slaughter work because they're in the heavier weight groups the most recent quarter. But then we normally have to jump back 6 months to the quarter previous to that to make sure that those hogs were in the pig crop and the farrowing to come through to the higher weight groups and then eventually end up being slaughtered. So that's what drives that. But we also still have that balance sheet to account for as well. So we have these slaughter numbers, but we have these survey indications, and we really have to kind of put the story of how they work together to make sure that those numbers work when we're doing our revisions process. So it's pretty involved, but we're looking at all those pieces, the balance sheet, the slaughter, plus the current surveys and the previous surveys to make sure we didn't misinterpret something when we're doing our revisions to previous quarters. So with that, just a short plug on, we have a data users meeting coming up. So if you ever want to learn more or attend or listen to this, it's virtual this year, and that information can be found on our website. So with that, that's all I have for the Hogs program, Dr. Elliott, and I'll hand it over to you.
Thanks, Nick. I appreciate that. All right. I'm going to go ahead and talk a little bit about some of the stuff we're working at UNL and how we can put the data that NASS puts together, the data that AMS puts together through their different divisions, such as mandatory price reporting, and how we can try to utilize or visualize that so that we can have basically better informed decisions. So to give an example of some of these projects that me and myself in particular am looking at. So this is 2 very commonly accessed reports. So on top we have the USDA-AMS MPR report. So this is mandatory price reporting. This is from daily to weekly to monthly publications. This is where a lot of, if you're producing under different contracts, you would access information here. And this is all publicly accessible and free. And then down here we have the NASS report. So Nick says he publishes all these, they upload it to some sort of database, and then they allow access for these to the general public. Some of it can be a bit tedious, or you have to go in there and manually do that. And so these products that I've been developing basically allows the user to have the ability to change the reports how they would want, and it automatically downloads the data for them, and basically that they can show the exact figure that they want. In the past, you might have gotten marketing reports, and those marketing reports have really what we call static, and it's just basically an Excel graph, and this graph shows basically one picture, but those are great to talk about one story, maybe 2 stories, but what I often found was when I was talking with producers, they have very specific questions that they want. They say, oh yeah, that's interesting on a 3-year average. What does the 10-year average look like? And the difficult for us as economists, or even for producers, it's, well, you got to go and make a whole new graph. And this is a way to work around that. So this, the one I'll be showing you about today, is specifically visualizing the USDA Hog and Pigs quarterly report. And that will be on farm.unl.edu in the first part of April. In May, we'll be releasing 2 other ones, the cattle on feed and the cattle inventory report. And then over the summer and fall and throughout this next year, so we'll be really trying to visualize the top 15 to 20 reports that producers use on a consistent basis. So as I kind of mentioned, I'm gonna just talk about briefly for about 5 minutes and show you some of the features that are gonna be in there. As we're going through, feel free to put any questions that you have for myself or Nick in the chat, and we'll have about 15-20 minutes for some Q&A at the end. The specific app that I'm gonna show you today is a web-based app. And the reason why we made it a web-based app rather than a phone app is so it can be really accessed anywhere, and for a variety of producers who maybe not have a cell phone or a smartphone. and specifically allows people to be interactive. It automatically updates for you, so it pulls all of the information, and it's also the greatest thing. It's free, at least to users of the product, although I put the time in to develop it. So if you have questions as you're going through the app or as you're going through, this is my contact information, and also this is where the tool will be located. Farm.unl.edu, the decision page tool for livestock. So I'll stop sharing here, and then I will show you the actual app. Okay, and so this is the hog and pigs. This visualizes the hog and pigs report. So what it allows you to do, there's several of these tabs up here. So this allows you to display the historical information. This allows kind of a spatial visualization. This allows you to look at kind of how the quarterly report is going through over time by quarter. And then this is strictly seasonal and how that quarterly report looks like over time. So let's just talk about the quarterly report. So here you have the opportunity to choose the category you want. I've chosen inventory, but you can choose the crop, pig crop, the litter rate, farrowed, or death loss. Here then you say, okay, within that inventory, you can choose total inventory, breeding inventory, market inventory. I've just chosen total inventory, but to give an example, we switch to breeding inventory and the graph over here automatically changes. If we go to market inventory, also changes. And if you want to look at very specific different weight categories, for instance. So let's just look at total inventory. Here I'm visualizing 3 different states, but I can choose the states that I want. So let's say I wanted Illinois, South Dakota, and let's say I wanted Iowa instead. Well, I can include Iowa in there as well. So I can basically choose the states I want to visualize. And then down here, if I feel like, wow, it's looking really interesting over here on this, looks like it's really starting to take off since 2014. I can come down here and just adjust that time and just visualize the parts of the data that I want. So if I only want to view it from there, that would be kind of an example of how to visualize that. Then the nice thing is some people, allows you to create this report, but then you can go and you can actually download this plot. So you don't have to go and get your snipping tool out and snip it. It downloads it as a PDF. And then in the case that you have a report essentially that you want to visualize the data yourself, you can just go and download the data here. So this is all taking data specifically from NASS and their quick stats database, and then visualizing it for you. But then you can then download the data if you want it for yourself. So the same thing applies here to the breeding. You have, I can look at the pig crop and updates. We can look at what the farrowing was. So let's just stick to inventory. And as Nick was saying, this is the percent change from, right now we're looking at what was the 1st of March hogs breeding inventory, and what was the difference between 2013 and 2020. So the way we'd go and look at that is in Nebraska, the breeding inventory that was reported on the 1st of March between 2013 and 2020 has increased about 13% between those reports. You can go here and have a whole bunch, nominal, if you just want to look at what was the actual value itself, change the years. And so it's very adaptive. And then once again, you can download the plot. And if you want, you can download the data. So this data is what's visualized in this plot here. And so if you were to change this, say I actually wanted 2017, then when you go here, you're downloading the 2017 data itself. So it allows you to recreate the figure if you'd want to. And you can also, of course, download it. So that gives you an idea of, this gives you an idea by state and how this is progressing through time. This gives you spatially, what is that looking like through time or within a given year or across years. And then this allows you to visualize what we call quarterly trends. And so as you're looking at this, it's like, okay, it's hard to see. I see the general trend over time, but maybe there's dynamics within quarter that I'm missing. So this subseasonal, what we call a subseasonal plot, allows me to visualize the data that's coming out from NASS and how that has been changing over time. So it looks like, this is for Illinois, and we're looking at litter rate. We can just pop the inventory because we were sticking on that. And what is the quarterly breeding, or what is the breeding between 2011 and 2021? And it's generally looks like, okay, since really, we go about here, really since about 2015, we've had steady increase year over year. So this we can look at, this allows us to look at what are the dynamics within quarter by state and by commodity. And then you can download the plot, and then of course you can download the data here as well. And then we have quarterly. I'll just go to inventory and we'll go to Illinois so we're consistent. And this kind of gives you an idea. I can basically allows me to plot the data itself. So this quarterly allows me to then combine all of those years through time and look at the specific quarters. So this purple line would be 2018 values, 2019 values, and then I can look at a 3-year average, which is 2018 through 2020. And then I can basically choose the average that I want. So these are all, of course, free for producers to use. These are some of the reports that generally, if you were to go to consulting services or you want to visualize this data, but we are gonna be providing this free to producers. And if there's questions as you're going through and you're working through the app itself, where you feel like I'm not understanding this, I'm the primary contact for that. And really, we're trying to, our goal and objective is to take all of this information that maybe you have to go to different resource or different locations and put it all into one app that allows you producers to ask the question that they would like. With that, we'll just open it up for questions. I've got a couple questions here for you, Nick, and we'll get started that way. If there are questions as we're going through, feel free to put them in the Q&A in the chat box, and I will pass them on to Nick. Nick, you mentioned that the December report has the hogs raised under contract. This is obviously a growing phenomenon, and very common now. So maybe talk a little bit about that and how that's reported, how you're monitoring that, and specifically how you're getting basically the people who are raising the under contract, or if you're contacting the actual contractor.
Okay. Yeah, that's good question. It's something I didn't bring up before. So just to kind of look here, make sure I'm getting it all from. Yep. Okay. So when we talk to the producers, we're trying to talk to the owners. So we know when that kind of breaks off into contractees and contract finishing, our goal, we only want to talk to the owner, so we don't double count anywhere. So that's one of the first questions we ask on the Hogs and Pigs questionnaire. Do you own the hogs? And if it's a no, then we want to go track down the owner and talk to them. So that's who we're talking to. Aside from that separate question of how many hogs and pigs are raised under contract, we published that on page 2 of the of our publication. Just noting, and I have it here. The total number of hogs under contract owned by operations is over 5,000 head. accounted for 48% of the US hog inventory. So we know it's a growing segment, and that's just kind of some, internal record keeping for us to make sure we're keeping stuff on the right track. Because when you think of some of these bigger multi-state operations, it can get really confusing very quickly of what hogs are in Iowa versus Minnesota versus Illinois, as we kind of work through these larger firms. So having that information, it broke out by state is helpful. And like I said, our goal is to contact the owners only, not the contractees.
Great, thanks. Then a follow-up question is, maybe you could talk a little bit about how you displayed the reliability table there, and that provides some, I guess, measure of how well NASS is doing over time. How does then, you mentioned that the farrowing, you said that, we're not doing so well there. How does NASS then take into account or adjust the way that they either sample or they come up with their estimates based upon that reliability table that you showed?
Right. Okay. So yeah, along those lines, what we do is every year I said, how we can revisit those Strata definitions and revisit how well the program is performing. We do that, every year, and we look at those Strata definitions normally in September, December, November, somewhere in that time frame. And we will look at that and think, what do we need to do to make sure we're covering these expected farrowings better? What can we do? And that's where we've tried to add this South Strata that we used to never have before, because a potential thought was that as more have moved to that farrow to wean concept, are we missing some of our farrowing operations? Are they getting lost in between the bigger finishing operations? So we will look at that and do our best to continue to identify, what can we do differently? Do we need to rephrase the question as well? Or is there just a different way we need to ask producers to report that data? So that is always up for discussion. I can't say we've really fixed it. I think it kind of shows there, we generally were underreporting. So that's something that at the local level, even at the national level, we'll continue to revisit how do we do a better job on this number.
Great. And so just for clarification, is that, are those updates from now moving forward, or is it from afterwards and then you go back and retroactively update those?
Normally, if we make a survey program change, like a questionnaire change, or if we're going to do like a Strata change, it'll be from that point in time going forward. When we look back at revisions, we can only revise so far, and then we don't kind of touch them again. And another thing that's kind of unique about those intentions numbers, we really don't go back and technically revise those. Those are just compared to actual farrowings as we move through. So, we actually go back and revise an inventory number. We go back and revise these other things. We don't go back and revise those intentions numbers because, once again, they were just intentions. And if you think about, especially the 3 to 6 month intentions, those sows haven't even, they haven't even been weaned yet to get in the population to be bred yet. So normally those 1 to 3 month intentions are hopefully a better indicator, because those sows and gilts should be bred. But the future ones, we have to know that they're still in the farrowing barn. Something could change that they may not get bred back for some reason. So it's something we're always considering, trying to make sure we're interpreting the data we're getting from producers correctly.
And where can producers go and find if you've updated those, or just kind of announcements? Are those publicly released, or is that?
Yep. If we do a big program change, yes, those are always publicly released. If it's a tweak to a question, it'll just be a change on the questionnaire. But if we're moving things around, or if we're changing published states, it will either be announced in the actual publication itself, or it will be announced in our program changes document that we normally post online. I can't remember the most recent changes for hogs, but when we did a bunch of crop changes this last year in terms of what crops were in each program, what we're doing for county estimates, NASS will generally make a nationwide press release for that.
Thank you. Yeah, so just to follow up on that is, you mentioned that NASS does revisions. Maybe you can talk a little bit about what is the general purpose for revisions, given that the market has already kind of passed and and updates that information. So maybe talk about, specifically why NASS wants to go back and potentially revise these and why they're so concerned about getting the right number historically, even though we're past that date.
Yeah. Good question there. I think along those lines, because so much of, any number that anybody publishes, whether it's corn or especially when you get into livestock, we're always comparing kind of year over year. So if we wouldn't go back and revise that number, slaughter could be showing, something totally different than what would be making sense with the NASS report. So if we go back and revise it and kind of keep our balance sheets in sync, even after the fact, it kind of just keeps all those pieces working together. Because if we didn't go back and revise, our balance sheet approach wouldn't work for us either, because there would be, poor data in those balance sheets as we're trying to work down, your previous inventory plus your pig crop plus imports, and you take out all those slaughtered animals plus your deaths to get to that current inventory number. That component or indication we look towards wouldn't be valuable to us. So I think that's why we have to go back and kind of true up all the data to make sure it's as correct as we can get it. So that way those that administrative data is more meaningful to us going forward.
Yeah, thanks. Just a reminder, if you have questions for either Nick or myself, feel free to put them in the Q&A box or the chat box, and we'll get them answered. We have about 4 minutes left, so we'll still have some time. Nick, a follow-up question would be, you mentioned some of the times when you're either surveying producers and some of the comments that you get, or even after you've published reports, and then you get potentially comments from either the industry. And maybe you can talk about what are some of the most common questions after the report has been published that NASS gets, and maybe some of their just kind of some of the responses to that.
I think some of the more common questions we will get is, some of the, the really good analysts out there, they have a good feeling, and you can even see it in their ag media articles, of the USDA NASS number was higher or lower than we expected. This is what it means for the market going forward. I think a lot of the times we will get questions on that. Well, okay, Nick, what does this hog report mean then? And that's kind of unique, where NASS has to step away. We're not going to project and say, what we think prices are going to be or what we think exports are going to be, because our goal is to stay, unbiased and just publish the most correct number. And so we often have to hand that piece off, and that's where it goes to, the economists like yourself or other folks to kind of project what's going forward. So that's often one of the biggest questions we get. What does this mean? What does it mean for prices? And we step away from that because we don't want to get in that arena. We kind of want to hand it off to even the Economic Research Service, another USDA agency, to kind of make those projections. Another question we can often get is, people actually believing that we do get reports from producers. I think there's assumptions at times that NASS does a lot of modeling in the data. Do you actually really reach out to producers? And other countries, other statistical agencies in other countries, they do a lot of modeling for their data when they publish it. But our data is coming from the producers, and we have very few models that point us in the right direction. It's survey-driven data from the owners of the hogs themselves. So NASS is often looked at as kind of the gold standard in terms of statistical agencies around the world and how we publish our data, how it's easy to access for all, and how it's available to all. So I think that's another question that people often ask, that, oh, so this is really from the producers. Like, yeah, here was our sample of 6,500 people, and we can't say who we talked to because we got to maintain that confidentiality, but we can show that this is the length we're going to make sure we're publishing the correct number for every state, and then at the US level as well.
Yeah, thanks, Nick. Part of that, you mentioned talking with producers, and the idea of confidentiality is extremely important. They're providing basically proprietary information. This is something that we face a lot of times when there's really thin markets, which on the pricing side. So often you'll see AMS reports where they're just not reporting in certain regions for certain times. Maybe you can talk a little bit about what is the confidentiality requirement. You talk to say we protect the information, but what actually is the thresholds you need to to meet in order to either report or not report something?
Okay. So it really kind of varies by program. So just to jump away from hogs just a little bit, on our county estimates program, that one's a little easier to explain. For the most part, to publish, a county level corn yield, we need either 30 reports or roughly 25% coverage of that number to publish it. So, because we don't want to publish just any number, we want to publish something that's statistically defensible. So on the crop side of things, as you approach a normal distribution, that's roughly 30 reports kind of gets you there. On the hog side of things, it's a little bit harder to apply that because we have some large firms in certain states that you don't need 30 reports, you maybe need 10 to publish the entire state number. So when we're looking at it on that side of things, our confidentiality rules are similar to kind of what AMS looks for. We need, roughly 3 or more reports, or we need to get to we have to make sure a producer doesn't have a certain percentage. And that can really vary by what commodity we're looking at and how many reports are in there. But generally, if someone makes up, too much of a majority of the commodity, we're going to have to hide that information. Because if I'm the number 1 producer in a state, or let's say I'm the number 2, and I know how many hogs I have, well, all I have to do is back out my number and all of a sudden I know what the top producer has. So we really look at it that way as well to make sure, do we need, 4 or 5 reports at least? And we have to make sure, that someone doesn't make up, 70, 80, 90% of that indication. So it's kind of a moving target, but that's another way we look at it as well, let alone not sharing that information out as well.
Thanks, Nick. Well, we've got about 3 more minutes, so why don't we go ahead and conclude the webinar. Thanks for joining us today, Nick, and for sharing your information, both from the practical, having administered the program, and kind of the broader view in your current role. And thank you to everyone who's joined us today. Be sure to check farm.unl.edu for a recording of this webinar, which will be made available, and also a schedule of future webinars that are upcoming. You can register for a similar webinar that Nick and I will present on April 29th, focusing on the NASS cattle reports. And you'll be receiving a short survey in the email. We'd really appreciate your feedback on today's webinar and input for future sessions. These are designed for the industry and for producers, so any input you have would be appreciated. Thanks again for joining me, Nick, and thanks to everyone, and hope everyone has a great day.